Welcome everybody, this is Edgardo, Balentine.
And this is Scott DiGregorio, and welcome to the Real Estate of Tomorrow podcast, where we're going to discuss the rapidly changing landscape of the real estate industry.
And the steps that you need to take today in order to survive tomorrow.
Look, I'm going to give you the perspective of a 25-year veteran, somebody who has been there and done that.
With Jesus life for all fart, okay?
Screw you, man.
Look, I'm going to give you a fresh perspective from somebody that's applying those steps today.
So that basically means you're young and you don't know shit.
All right, let's get this started. Welcome everybody to the Real Estate of Tomorrow podcast. This is Edgardo Balentine.
And I am Scott DiGregorio. What is up, brother?
Dude, I am very interested to listen to your take on this because, you know, as somebody that's been around for centuries, you've seen a lot of shit fail, right? You know, the Roman Empire. You've seen a lot of shit fail, in all seriousness, and you know, the economy as it is. Yes, everybody knows about the Great Depressions and shit like that. But for a lot of us, those are concepts.
Right.
A lot of us haven't really witnessed in our adult life, at least, banks failing, right, and people's accounts being wiped out and things like that. Those are things that we've watched movies about, but like everything that you've seen in Hollywood over and over again, they just become, okay, it's trivial. It's something that happened, but it's not going to happen again.
Right.
Nobody would allow it to happen again. And then in the past, I don't know, 2 months or whatever it is, we've had some big banks failing, SVB being one, and then obviously affecting the economic stability of other banks. You know, in the mortgage world that we're living in, we've seen a lot of mortgage companies fall too. And I'm very curious to hear your take, because from where I'm standing is something that it's very surprising that this is happening. I don't want to say again, but that this is happening. And, you know, from somebody that has lived through the big crash and then seeing this happen, I'm very curious to see, for you to, one, tell me what the fuck is going on, and two, tell me what your take is from what happened before to what's happening now. So why don't you just take it away, man?
Yeah. So look, it's, you know, this has obviously happened before, and in the last couple of months, the second, third, and fourth largest bank to ever fail has failed. So this is not something to, you know, shrug off and not pay attention to. And for the real estate community that's listening to us, to our audience, pay attention to this, because there is an absolute direct correlation between what's going on in the banking industry right now and people's confidence levels in the economy. And when people are unsure of what's going on in the economy, they don't run out and buy houses necessarily.
Yeah, they don't spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, let alone millions of dollars in shit.
I mean, look, some people have to move, and they have to move, and that's that. But this is the type of stuff that impacts markets, particularly here in Florida, that is a big vacation home type of market that we're in. So, look, the information that's out there now, or what a lot of people think, is that SVB failed. Now, SVB stands for Silicon Valley Bank. And what a lot of people think is that they failed because they invested in a bunch of risky, you know, like Tech Valley startups.
Yeah, startups and shit like that, which, whatever, it's very risky, so it's normal that every once in a while it'll fail.
Exactly. The problem is that's just not at all true. Okay, so here's the cycle that happens. And by the way, the direct cause of this is, in my opinion, well, it is inflation, and in my opinion, the Federal Reserve's completely improper handling of the inflation, which we'll get into. All right, so here's the deal. Most of SVB's money was invested in long-term treasuries, okay, which is the safest
very
investment
opposite
you can
from very opposite from startups, right? They're not. It's not a bunch of apps,
right? Yeah. So they're investing in 10, 20, 30-year treasuries. Well, think back a year. 10, 20, and 30-year treasuries were paying 0.001%,
right,
or 1%, like next to nothing, right? Now, the banks always, a lot of people don't understand how banks work and how banks make money. Banks are always working off of the spread between what they're earning on the depositor's money, right? So you deposit $100,000 with the bank. The bank immediately takes that $100,000 and starts earning money with it. Okay, one of the ways they earn money is they invest in these treasuries. And then they then pay you a small amount. And the spread between what they're earning and what they're paying the depositors is their profit.
Sure.
So a year ago, 2 years ago, 10 years ago, banks invested in all of these long-term treasuries, paying next to nothing. We've all gotten so used to earning nothing on our bank accounts. It's not even part of the discussion anymore.
No, you don't expect to make any money off of your savings account.
In your adult life, that's just never been a thought.
It's just a joke.
Yeah. And I mean, even though your adult life's like 6 months long. But what happens is when inflation starts to go up, all of a sudden now, the yields on bank accounts have to go up with them. So now all of a sudden, you started off, you had money invested at, I'll make up 1%, and you were paying your deposit as 1/10%. So you're making 0.9%,
Right.
Nice spread. Well, now all of a sudden, as inflation goes up, your depositors go, yeah, I'd like 3% because the bank across the street's giving me 3%. Well, now you have a problem. Now you have all this money tied up in these long-term treasuries. And these people are demanding more money. And if you don't give them more money, they're going to leave. They're going to pull the money out, which is worst case scenario. So what ends up happening is you end up in this downward spiral. So you pay them what you can, but you can't necessarily pay them as much as they want. So they leave. As they leave, there's a reserve capital, a reserve requirement. This came out of the 2008 crash. Banks are only allowed to lend out 90% of their assets. So let's say,
Which is doesn't sound like a bad idea.
it's a very reasonable idea. It's why the big banks failed
Sure.
in 2008. So let's say you have, to make up numbers, $1 billion, and you have 900 million lent out. Well, now let's say they take 200 billion. Depositors take 200 billion out of your account. Well, now you can't have 900 billion lent out. You can only have 720. So now we have a $180 billion shortage. The only thing they could do to raise money is to sell those treasuries. Well, let me ask you a question. If you could invest in a treasury today and earn 3%, but I wanted to sell you one at 1%, would you take it?
No, fuck that. Why?
Right? Exactly. The only way you would take it is if I discounted the price.
So much so, yeah.
Drastically, right? So, okay, listen, here's $1 billion worth of treasuries. The interest rate sucks, but I'll sell it to you for 700 million.
Then it makes sense.
Right. So, boom. But the bank is down 300 million. And this downward death spiral begins. And then news gets out. And news gets out and people get nervous about the banks.
So they pull the money.
So they pull the money out. And now there's another loss. So they have to sell even more treasuries at a loss. And this whole thing, like in SVB's case, can happen in a couple of days. You could go from a perfectly funded bank to bankrupt.
So this is not necessarily, and I know we're talking about SVB, but SVB.
Bank.
This is not necessarily because of a mismanagement of the money. Then is what you're saying. It's not because the bank is so irresponsible, whether it's SVB or another bank. It's because the bank is so irresponsible that they're just gambling the money away.
Not even close. Look, I don't.
That makes it more scary.
That is more scary. Look, one bank being irresponsible.
Drunk and gambling everything in Vegas. It's like, all right, whatever. That's not on me.
That's like the not the Bitcoin guy, but the
Yeah.
So no, this is just, again, and this is why, right? I put out a video the first April of 2021 or whatever it was. Yeah, it was 2021. When inflation came out, the Federal Reserve came out and said this is transitory, meaning short term. And there are videos still online on Facebook of me saying this is ridiculous. This isn't short term because of supply chains and COVID and everything else. This is going to persist. And if they don't get aggressive with it soon, if they wait too long, they're going to cause big problems. They did not change their stance for 8 months. 8 months, I was screaming from the rooftops that they were going to screw it up. And this is what I meant by screw it up. Because as inflation skyrockets, like, our inflation was high, yes, but what was bad was how quickly it went from non-existent to high.
Well, and then the response from the Fed, which was, let's just keep increasing that rate until something happens. And, as we followed, it's not something that they just turn on, right?
No.
For them to increase the rate, it takes about 60 days, 90 days for us to feel it in the market. So, we can have 3 rate increases before we even feel the first one.
Yeah, and what they should have done, in my opinion, was instead of raising the rates 0.75, they should have raised it twice as much as that. And I understand for political reasons why you don't want to do that, because it's going to jolt the economy and put us into a recession, which we're going to go into anyway. But I understand why they were trying to do it.
Already.
Yeah, I understand why they're trying to do it, but that is what caused Signature Bank and SVB to fail. It was literally a result of inflation required the depositors to demand more money, which required them to sell the treasuries at a loss.
Okay, so that sounds terrible. And it sounds like almost inevitable. Tell me why I shouldn't just, listening to this, turn this off, and go pull all my money out of the bank.
So fire is the answer to that. Look, at the end of the day, the depositors are safe, right? The FDIC is there. And by the way, for people listening, in fact, I have a client that had $800,000 in one bank account.
Whew.
And I said, you are beyond the FDIC limit.
Yeah, which is $250, by the way, $250,000
for one person.
For one person,
okay, and $500 for a couple. So I told him, I said, that bank fails, you're down $300,000.
Yeah,
so
you can have accounts in other banks, and as long as it's $250,000 on each bank, you're good.
You're fine. So he went and moved his money yesterday, in fact. But
buy a house.
He's shopping. So that's what happened there. But what we're dealing with now is a whole new problem. Okay, and what's going on now is this: investors are shorting the stocks of regional banks. Okay, and when you short a stock, what it means is that you are gambling, you're betting that the stock price is going to drop, in some cases plummet. And that's a whole segment of the market. It's 100% gambling, but it's one of those things that if you nail it, it could really work, like it could really pay out well for you. So what's happening now is that people are shorting banks. And because people are shorting banks ratings are dropping. When a bank's rating drops, its ability to borrow money and raise capital drops. And then word gets out and people start pulling their money out of that bank. And that same downward spiral will happen. Now,
can you tell us something good, please?
Yes. So the FDIC after SVB went down, made a move that I thought was really smart. And what they said was, okay, we're going to basically set up an unlimited credit line for banks. So look, if this happens and you're jammed up, you could borrow it from Uncle Sam. Okay? You could give it back to us with no interest, or however they did that. I don't know if there was interest or not. But they set up this credit line to kind of stabilize the banking industry. And then a major bank, and it's terrible during the episode that the name of it's escaping me, but a major bank overseas went under and caused more instability in it. So I thought the FDIC's move was really going to help, and I believe it probably will. But the investors now shorting banks. And by the way, for those of you listening, we're not talking about Chase and Wells Fargo. We're talking small regional banks. And I'm definitely not talking about all small regional banks, but, I think there's a watch list with like 25 banks in America that are on this watch list. Now, I'm not saying that 25 will fail, but there's 25 that are not in great shape right now. So, I think this will continue to pan out. Now, you and I stay very kind of kept up on what's going on. Inflation should be coming down this summer. That should take some of the pressure off of the banks. But another thing that was announced today, the day of the recording, the day of the release, is that the Federal Reserve raised rates another 25 basis points today, and they're talking about doing it yet again. And this is another example where I think the Fed is just screwing it up. Every time the Fed raises rates, although it certainly doesn't directly raise mortgage rates, it does directly raise depositors' rates. So it furthers this problem. And inflation, by every single measure that's out there, has been cut dramatically, like 80%. The fact that there are pretty much locked into another 25 basis point increase is just
lack of patience.
It's just a step in the wrong direction. Like the Federal Reserve has mishandled this. And if you go in and look at the members of the Federal Reserve, they're new at this and their inexperience is showing. They're going back to Volcker back in the 70s and trying to mimic what he did, and it's a totally different world we live in now, 50 years later. But anyway, they are pretty much guaranteed, they've said, to increase rates another 25 basis points, which is really putting the hammer down even more on this banking situation. So,
all right, so since you felt like giving us the good news, then let me just finish this with
Break
the good news. The good news is, as much as the Federal Reserve is messing this up, the expectation is for inflation to come down. And with inflation coming down, things should start normalizing a little bit.
Yes.
This is a very turbulent time that we're living in. It feels like we've been living in craziness for a long time for different reasons. COVID, and then, in the what we call recession that the government doesn't, and then now this crazy inflation that we're living through, all of these things. But after the storm, the calm is right. Is that a saying in English?
The calm after the storm.
The calm after the storm. We're going through the hardest part, but I really think that, like we said, during summer, we expect inflation to go down and things should normalize. And once it's extremely obvious that inflation is normalizing and coming down, then the Federal Reserve should back off a little bit, and things should start, going back to some time. Forget about normal. It should just stabilize a little bit. Okay, so we're screwed with the banks, but not every bank. The big banks should be okay.
Yeah.
And the biggest takeaway for me for something like this is, look, to be completely fair, after 2008 and all of that happened, I wasn't really in my adult life then.
Sure.
Now that I'm in my adult life, I look at those things just as historical facts that you don't think will happen again. A lot of, not a lot of things like 2008 are happening, but a lot of the big corporations and systems that you assume they're too big to fail don't seem as strong. And that just from a personal standpoint, it makes me be a little bit more careful about things like what you're saying, about the $250,000 limit, about things like, hey, there is something to say about being in a big bank and things like that. So just, that's what's happening right now. That's the world right now.
Yeah, and there's more bumps ahead, but I think the worst is probably, about to be behind us. So the next thing to keep an eye on is how the Federal Reserve starts handling the lowering of their rates. Right. Do they keep rates high for longer than they should, or do they bring them down at an appropriate level? So that'll be the next thing that we'll have to monitor and report on. But the other thing, I do have a piece of good news. As inflation comes down, mortgage rates will come down. As mortgage rates will come down, the housing market will increase. And we're expecting a very strong summer and fall housing market.
Yeah.
So that's a good thing. All right, folks, you heard it here first, or at least you heard it here best. So I'm Scott DiGregorio. Thank you so much for listening to the greatest real estate podcast out there, The Real Estate of Tomorrow. Remember what we always like to ask you, are you doing what you need to do today to be effective in the real estate of tomorrow?
Thank you for all the great news today, Scott.
We'll see you in 2 weeks.
Next time. Well, thank you guys for listening. And now it's your turn to implement everything you learned today.
Look, you have a question, you have a topic for a future episode?
Share with us.
Yeah, tell us what you're doing. What are you doing today so you could be successful tomorrow? Send us an email at success@realestateoftomorrow.com.
And don't forget to leave us a review, an honest review.
Screw an honest review. Leave us a 5-star review. And for every 5-star review we get, we're going to send you a badass Real Estate Mean t-shirt.
Those shirts are hilarious.
See ya.